Hey everybody, it's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video. I'm going to be going back to Survivor today, talking about what my ideal cast for Survivor Winners at War would have been. So obviously there was a season called Winners at War, and they had a particular group of people, not everybody I was very excited to see, if we're being quite frank, and I would have cast a few different winners than the ones who were cast. So first things first, if you do not want to have at least 20 seasons of Survivor spoiled for you, I would suggest you not watch this video. Otherwise, I am going to be talking about obviously 20 different winners, so uh, that season will probably be spoiled for you, so just beware going into this. So the first winner I have is Boston Rob. I think he's kind of an essential winner to have on any season. He is the guy who's played the most seasons of Survivor. He's competed 5 different times in Marquesas, All Stars, Heroes and Villains, Redemption Island, and then, of course, the latest being Winners at War. Interestingly, every season besides his first season has had like a theme to it or been like an all-star season between All Stars, Heroes versus Villains, Redemption Island was very themed, and then Winners at War. So he's been on a lot of returning seasons, and I think he's just kind of an essential person to have on the cast. Second, Yul Kwon. He is probably my personal favorite winner, or one of my personal favorites. I think he is a very fun guy. I think he's very likable. He was on the actual Winners at War, and I was really happy they got him. I didn't think they were actually going to get him when they were initially casting this season. They had tried to get him before for like Heroes versus Villains, and he had turned it down, and he had been one of the people who said I'll only ever come back for an all-winner season. And so he did actually end up coming back for this one, so I was very pleased by that. But yeah, very cerebral player, and I think it'd be very enjoyable to see him on a Winners at War season as we did. Next, of course, Tony Vlachos, a very exciting, fun player, very strategic, very loud and entertaining. He, of course, was also on Winners at War and um, was very entertaining and interesting on that season as well. And I think kind of like Boston Rob on any major all-star season for a while going forward, I think he'd be a staple. Like you'll notice that they brought him back for Game Changers, which was like the first returning player season besides Second Chance since his season, and then they brought him back for All Winners. I think production really likes Tony, and for a good reason. He's just a really fun, entertaining guy and plays a really interesting game as well. Next, I have Tyson on here. Tyson is a guy who's competed a lot on Survivor as well, like Boston Rob. He was on the actual Winners at War too. And just so you know, I'm starting off with all the people who were actually on the season, and then I'll get into those who weren't. But I think Tyson is a really good selection again. He was on Tocantins, Heroes versus Villains. Of course, he won Blood versus Water, and then he was on Winners at War. I think he's a guy who everybody likes, and again, he's pretty funny, and that's a good dynamic to add to a Survivor season because you don't want everybody out there just being like a supreme strategist and being super serious all the time. You want somebody who can kind of lighten the mood at times, and I think that's what Tyson brings. And so I I think he's a really good addition for an all-winner season. I think he's actually had one of the best arcs of any Survivor player also. He goes from basically being a lackey and like a non-strategist whatsoever in Tocantins to a guy who tries to strategize in Heroes and Villains, and it totally blows up on him, to playing a really kind of revised game in Blood versus Water and playing really well, and then kind of uh, striking a balance on the fourth season Winners at War and just kind of doing okay. So I think you kind of never know what you're going to get out of him, and that's a fun thing to have in a person on a given season. Next, Ethan Zohn, who is kind of the representative old school player here. I think he embodies old school play where he just on the season he won, he basically totally relied on social game. He didn't make huge flashy moves or blindsides or win a ton of immunities or find any idols or anything. He literally got by just by being a really nice, likable person who was always securely in a really good alliance and just kind of got by on his personality. And I think that he is actually like a really good, really nice person, and he was good to have on Winners at War. And in my ideal cast, he'd still be there. Now we'll be getting into the guys who weren't featured. Firstly, Richard Hatch, the winner of the original season. I think just if you're gonna have any Winners at War season, you'd want him on there. Apparently, he wasn't on the real Winners at War for a bunch of disputed reasons. You know, Survivor might say one thing and he might say another. I think Survivor just says that they just didn't need him, and he would say that he didn't get on there because Survivor doesn't like that he walked around naked on his first two seasons, so they thought he was too much of a wild card to bring back. Um, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but I think he would have been really entertaining to have, and I think he actually would have done pretty poorly if I'm being frank. Um, I think his I think he was revolutionary for a first season, but I think like in retrospect his game was much more simple with a modern lens. It's kind of like taking an NBA player from the 1950s and comparing them to today. You know, the 1950s guy was great back then, but in the modern game he looks very average. I think that's what Richard Hatch would be, but it would be interesting to see him in that environment. Next, we have Fabio, who, if you didn't know, and I think a lot of people can forget, his real name is Judson, which I find really funny. Fabio is kind of like basically a dumber Tyson, I think, in that I think he'd be quite a wild card. He's very good in challenges. I think he won 4 individual immunities, which is very good and impressive. I think his personality is really light and fun, and I think that's really good to have on a season like this where you're kind of trying to balance it out with a ton of really hardcore strategists and gamers. I think it's good to have a guy who's much more lighthearted on the set, and I think that's what Fabio could bring to the island. So I would really like to see him on there. And I actually think he would do pretty decent. I think because of his physical ability, he would definitely get to the merge because he'd be a really good asset on whatever tribe he was on, and he'd probably get cut mid merge, or he might even get to the end just because he lacks strategic ability. But I think it'd be really interesting to see him on a second time because a lot of people think that his game wasn't really worthy of a winner, so it'd be interesting to see how far he'd get on an all winner season. I really wish he would have been on all winners. It really disappoints me that he wasn't. Next, Todd Herzog, who wasn't on Winners at War for a bunch of different reasons. If you didn't know, Todd's had some personal issues in his life involving substances and mainly alcoholism, but I think that he would be a great addition to a season. I think he's reportedly getting a lot better and has been on a good path lately, so I can understand why Survivor didn't have him on, but it would have been super cool to have had him. He's considered one of the better strategists to ever have been on Survivor, and a lot of people credit him with having the greatest final tribal council of all time and really being able to speak very well to the jury and really articulate himself very well, and also just being a really keen strategist. And also, I never realized this until now, but very, very striking Adam Scott look-alike. He looks a lot like Adam Scott from Parks and Rec. But yeah, I would have loved to see Todd on Winners at War. Next, Cochran. I think Cochran is sort of in the Todd vein as well, but I think a little less mean spirited. I think Todd was sort of willing to slit anybody's throat at any cost, and I think Cochran is sort of in a similar vein where he's not necessarily a physical threat. He's much more of a mental chess kind of player where he's going to outwit you, but not necessarily outplay you in challenges. In when he did compete in Cambodia, or excuse me, Karamoan, I think he did technically win uh, 3 individual immunities, but they were all basically non-physical ones. Like I think one of them was one based on a game or a puzzle, and another was one based on like eating bugs. So he's not really a physical threat, but very very nice guy. Seems like he'd be fun to have around, and pretty likable on the seasons that he was on. So I think he would have been a really good addition. Apparently, he wasn't on Winners at War because he is employed by CBS, and he doesn't really want to have a weird contract conflict of interest sort of thing with him writing for TV shows on CBS and then also being on a game show for it anymore. So um, it makes sense why he wasn't on, but he was a really fun winner when he did compete. And I believe this is the last of the guys I have on here, and that's Earl Cole. Earl is, I think, one of the least talked about, but probably one of the best winners of all time. And I think the way that people think about Kim Spradlin as far as being the most dominant winner ever and things like that is really how people should think about Earl. I think Earl basically on that season, Fiji, I think he wins basically versus any person on that season in a final three, which is something you can rarely say about a Survivor player. But I think, yeah, I think Earl, if you put anybody in the final three with him, he handily beats them. A lot of people thought Yao Man was the leader on that season and the best shot at winning, but apparently a lot of the jury said afterwards that that was a lot of editing and that like Earl was clearly the power player and Yao was kind of just his sidekick. So um, yeah, I would have loved to see Earl. I think he's kind of in that Yule vein of being very cerebral but also very quiet and a guy who observes a lot and even more under the radar than Yule in that I think like Earl, you're never gonna see him coming, but once he does, you're gonna be like, dang, there goes Earl. So yeah, I love him. Him and Yule are probably my favorite winners of all time. So I'd love to see Earl on a season of Winners at War. But I think he just had a baby born, and that's why he couldn't compete. Next, Natalie Anderson, great personality, really fun person. I think she'd be great to have on Winners at War. She obviously was, as we saw, and I don't have much else to say. I think Natalie's really just a great addition to any cast. She's got a really dynamic, likable personality and really good all around at strategy and at challenges. So I think she's really cool to have on any season of Survivor, really, especially Winners at War, as she was. Kim, of course, being such a dominant presence on her season, I think she's a must. And of course, she was on Winners at War, and it was interesting to see her play. But yeah, I think you still need to keep her for another season of Winners at War. Sandra, the only two-time winner up until Winners at War happening. She is a very colorful character and like has a lot of personality to her and is very I think that although her gameplay is never that compelling, her personality is very compelling and she has actually quite a bit of charisma. And so I think that she is most welcome on any Winners at War season, obviously. But for casting my own, I would definitely have her on there. I think another kind of must-have on any Winners at War season, and I think Jeff talked about this, but like the must-haves for Winners at War were like Boston Rob, Parvati, and Sandra, and so rounding that trio out, I have Parvati here. Um, I actually don't think she's as like legendary as a lot of people want to say. Like she's very forgettable in Cook Islands. Like it's honestly pretty shocking that she even was invited back for Fans versus Favorites. She of course played well in Fans versus Favorites, but I think it was more that she was one of a collective alliance rather than her like being the dominant force. I think it was kind of a collective like between her, Suri, and Amanda, and it's almost like that trio deserved to be the winner rather than just one person necessarily. And it's to me, she she's a good player, but I also think that like people call her like almost the greatest of all time, whereas I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think like she really benefited from having a tremendous alliance in season 16, and then it's season 20. I think it's a season where she actually earned the credit of being a good player and that she was in a really bad position and she really fought her way to be probably the most powerful player during the season. And I think she should have won that season, Heroes versus Villains, but of course Sandra ended up being our winner. Danni Boatwright next, very underrated survivor, not one who people often think about. She was very quiet in her actual play on Winners at War and went out pretty early. I think again the reason I'm putting her on here is that I just like her a lot. I think she's very nice and was very positive in Guatemala despite like a terrible setting and like very harsh conditions. And on Winners at War too, she seemed like a very positive person. So I would keep her on for winners an all winner season. Sophie Clarke. I initially didn't really like Sophie on the season that she won South Pacific, but when she was on Winners at War, she showed a lot of gumption, and I think that she deserves to be on, and I would include her as well. Um, and I think that we saw more of like what she can do on her own. Like in South Pacific, kind of from like day one, she was in like a very strong like 6-person alliance that basically ran the game. But in Winners at War, she showed what she can do kind of on her own, which is pretty cool. And so yeah, I'd keep her in. Next, Denise Stapley. Denise was on Winners at War. She had a very good outing in um, the Philippines the first time, being the only winner to go to every tribal council for an entire season. I think she's got some resiliency in her. She's really smart, and she's kind of like a snake in the weeds. Like you get like kind of like Earl. Like you won't see her coming, but once she's got you, she's got you. And if you've seen some of her big moves in Winners at War, you'll know what I'm talking about. So definitely gotta have Denise on an all-winner season. Tina Wesson. Uh, I know I'm rating a lot of these people on likability, but I just really like Tina. Um, I think she's really sweet, and I think although she's a little bit older, I guess that's why she wasn't included originally on Winners at War, but I would have loved to have had her on the season. Vecepia, very forgotten about, very underrated, but very, again, I keep saying it, but very likable. I think very distinct in that she was the first minority winner on Survivor, and I think that's pretty cool. And I think something really cool about Survivor is that it kind of showed that like anybody can do it. Like season one, a middle-aged man won. Season two, a middle-aged woman won. Season three, a young man. Season four, a younger minority woman. Like I think Survivor's very cool in that way that like anybody can win Survivor, and I think Vecepia was one of the first people to prove that, and I think that's so cool. And she's again really likable and very sweet, but she's also got some good strategy under her belt too. So I would like to see her back again to see what she could do a second time. Then Natalie White, I think somebody who we didn't really get to see much actual gameplay out of because she really just rode coattails. She's probably one of the most head scratching selections I have here, kind of like Fabio. But I think why I'd have her on is that you don't need every person to be super dominant and like a mental chess player, super strong gamer. You got to have a good mix, and I think Natalie would bring an interesting dynamic. Um, and it'd be interesting to see what she'd do without somebody kind of calling the shots for her like Russell did for all of her season. And that's it, guys. That's the entire gamut. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye.